Since the team decided to settle down and start a long-term base, things had generally gone pretty well for them. 2 other survivors have been found, Agent and Reginald, both fairly skilled workers who contributed well to the colony. Research was going well, the farm steady, and although they had their ups and downs, they had made good progress in establishing a base and starting their research towards microelectronics. However, their journey was not all sunshine and rainbows, with the local fauna often going berserk, from strange alien creatures to ones they recognised from Earth. The animal life here seemed particularly violent towards them, and despite the wolves literally being at their front door, they had survived trials and tribulations and had established a thriving colony. With the biggest news being that Kivy had become pregnant. Whether this would bring happiness or disaster was yet to be seen. On day 61, the colony was low on food, supplies, and their dining room was only half built. The crew decided they were past using a water tub and a latrine, and that they were ready to get some proper infrastructure set in place to make their lives more tolerable. The pond, east of the base, would provide ample water for them, so they set up a water well and pipework so that they'll be able to have a water fountain, a proper sink, and toilet going forward. This would make life much nicer than having to drink from the same bowl that they washed their hands in. They carried on working on their dining room, adding skylights and flooring, finally making the place seem more like a home. They also made sure they had enough warm clothing, ready for next winter. They had plenty of cloth now from the mushrooms they'd been growing, and they decided to put it to good use. On day 62, a strange asteroid came crashing down to the planet. The asteroid itself wasn't the weird thing, although it was made of a blue shiny metal, but it was the strange floating eel-like creatures that emerged from it as soon as it landed that made the colony wary. Not knowing what the strange creatures were, they gave the asteroid and its inhabitants a wide berth. They were glad of this when later in the day, a number of them went mad and decided to attack the base. They were used to these attacks now and locked the door behind them, ready for the long slog ahead of staying indoors. Unfortunately, they hadn't quite set up the water well and pipework yet, and so they had to rely once again on the old stinky wash tub that they used for all their hygiene needs. And it was at this moment Agent decided to go on a mental break. Thankfully, this break didn't last long, but the extreme mental break did cause a change to his character, and he became psychically hypersensitive, which could cause problems for the group going forward. By day 63, all of the strange eel-like creatures had calmed down. The team got stuck into the infrastructure for their water supply, setting up a wind pump, large water tank, and a sewage outlet north of the base, away from where anyone tended to venture. By the end of the day, they'd finally finished this infrastructure, and the first trickle of water came in through the pipes. Day 64, with the plumbing all set up, they finally made an actual toilet, making it out of mushroom stalk, to remind them, every time they did their business, of the journey they'd taken to get to this moment. And all was well with the colony, until a streak of fire was seen hurtling towards them through the sky. Another transport pod crashed nearby, only this time, it wasn't just any colonist, it was Reginald's grandmother. But something wasn't quite right with her. She was different, changed, no longer human, but a strange mushroom-like creature who was repulsive to look at, and clearly no longer the person she once was. Reginald took one look at her and knew what he needed to do. Aliona, the psychopath she was, knew that they needed clothing more than anything else right now, and so decided to take all the clothing that she was wearing so that it could be useful later on. And whilst Reginald stood there, grief-stricken, Aliona put her out her misery. Rot stink gas erupting from her as soon as she drew her last breath. She was at peace now. She wouldn't deteriorate anymore. After sorting out their greenhouse and fixing some of the poorer quality soil, they finally finished researching tree sowing, and with their food supply still low, decided to study berry cultivation. It was at this moment Kivy decided to pop the question to Agent, and the two became engaged. Everyone in the colony was excited by the news. By day 68, the colony's storeroom was once again full to the brim. It now just looked like one giant mess. And so the group decided to streamline some of their storage, transferring as much food as they could to the kitchen to make cooking and dining more streamlined. But by day 70, the colony's happiness was once again cut short by a huge group of disease-ridden rabbits who were running frenzied towards the colony. The crew were unsure why the only Earth-like creatures they ever saw on this planet were rabid and bloodthirsty. They presumed it had something to do with the planet's history, from the old structures and remnants of human activity, it was clear that this planet had once been flagged for terraforming. But maybe the reason why this planet was abandoned was the same reason for the Earth-like creature's madness. It was an interesting theory, but they doubted they would ever find the actual answers. During their time in isolation, both Kivi and Aliona developed malaria. But the colony wasn't worried, with ample medicine to treat it. Buck was more concerned with the meaning of life and her purpose on this planet. After her deep talk with Reginald, she realized she needed to try and be more positive with the group, and so treated Aliona, trying to be pleasant with her and make small talk to improve their relationship. But Buck's new lease on life didn't fly with Agent. Agent still hadn't forgiven her for the way that she treated Kivi, and so the two remained at odds with each other. Once all the rabbits had left the vicinity, the crew decided with their increased population they needed to expand the base. They rearranged the spare bedroom they had, which allowed them to make a new corridor. Here they would build a large room, which they would dedicate solely to research, allowing more of their colonists more time to study, collate their knowledge, and figure out a way to escape this planet. After they'd researched berry cultivation, the team doubled down on researching the Ashland biome that bordered them. The more they could learn about this planet, its fauna and flora, the better. Once again though, the bovine beetle eggs had hatched, and hundreds of bovine grubs now took up residence in their kitchen. The group decided, as a collective, that they didn't need more bovine beetles, and so they slaughtered the grubs for extra food and materials that they could use for clothing. It wasn't the nicest food, but at this point, they couldn't afford to be picky. With the birth of Kivi and Agent's child fast approaching, the pair decided to get their room ready for their baby. They made a crib for it to sleep in, and a wooden car for it to play with, to teach them about the world where they'd come from. The next day, Aliona put the finishing touches to the research room, and just in time, Buck finished researching Ashland survival. They decided with their abundance of Devilstrand seeds, they would finally learn how to plant this strange, slow-growing mushroom for its fibers. The research room was finally complete, with enough space for 4 colonists to research at the same time. The crew quickly made full use of this space, busying themselves with research. But a few days later, another transport pod crashed nearby the colony. A teenager called Rennie, who was unfortunately staggeringly ugly. Aliona rescued her and patched her up as best she could, but Aliona simply couldn't see past her hideousness and took an instant dislike to her. Alongside Rennie, a few weapons in a separate pod crash-landed nearby. A calcium polymer hatchet, as well as a charge pistol, a much-needed ranged weapon for the colony. Despite Rennie being rescued, she was put off joining by Aliona's instant dislike of her, and decided that she would fare better out in the wilds than people who would judge her based on her appearance. After the group finished researching Devilstrand, they planned to study writing and how to create books. If they were able to document their experience, they could bring it back to Earth for future study. Their base at this point was in full swing. With most of their bovine beetles now at adulthood, they had plenty of egg and milks to eat, as well as the rice, potatoes and mushrooms that they were harvesting. With the colony constantly growing, they decided to remove the large boulder that was in front of the base, allowing them to expand in the future. This also provided Kivi with a good line of sight for when one of the strange eel-like creatures came to attack them. They managed to defeat it with ease, but through the encounter, they learned that this strange eel attacked with an electric shock. They realised they needed to be careful against these at melee range, as the shock was clearly enough that it could cause a fatal heart attack. The stress of this attack was enough to send Kivi into labour. The moment had finally arrived. Baby was on its way. Reginald, as the best medic of the team, helped with the delivery. Agent stood to their side of their tiny room, trying to let Reginald do his job. After many hours of struggling, pain, and anguish, Kivi finally gave birth to a healthy baby girl. The couple named her Ash, a name to symbolise the planet they'd crash-landed on, and that Ash had been born into. While Agent slept soundly that night, Kivi lay there, anxious about their future. She prayed that this world would not be her life. To celebrate Ash's birth, the planet sent a pack of man-hunting boom rats to their door. Stuck indoors once again, the team researched throughout the day. The birth of Ash inspired them to try harder than ever to find a way off this planet. After figuring out how to make books, the team's next step was some basic electronics. They thought with the parts they had, they might be able to put together a basic radio. They wouldn't be able to transmit anything yet. They hoped using this as a prototype would allow them to develop transmitters later on down the line. After the monthly culling of the bovine beetle grubs, the team realized they needed better equipment for managing their supplies. Backpacks would allow them to carry more, allowing greater efficiency while working. On day 83, after decorating the base with some benches, they were attacked once again by giant black insects, hell-bent on destroying their base. Brutus managed to tank them, and in doing so, the team managed to take them out without any major damage to themselves. These insects, when butchered, left an extremely hard material behind. The team thought that this would make fairly good protective clothing, and so they sought to stockpile this while they could, to make decent armor for the future. On day 84, it was finally time to build the prototype radio that they'd been researching. The radio would bring them hope, but would also comfort them. Even if they were only able to hear the faintest signal from somewhere off-world, it showed that there were others out there who may be able to help them. With all the mad animals for now finally dispersed, the colonies saw fit to protect their base against the constant attacks. They decided to build a wall around the outer perimeter, using the bones that they had stockpiled over the last few months. They built the wall to give them ample room to grow, but also small enough that they would have the resources to build it quickly. And with research on electronics finally done, they decided it was time to research septic tanks. Although disgusting, if they could store their waste, they may be able to recycle it into useful material, such as fuel for their generators or fertilizer for their crops. But continue to try and get along with the other colonists. For once, the team was getting along well. All of them were in high spirits, all of them content with each other's company. Kivi even threw a party for them all, to celebrate their success, the birth of Ash, and how everyone was finally getting along. They all had an amazing time playing poker, eating, and carefully listening to the radio, hoping to hear some broadcast from someone out there who may be able to help. This brief spell of happiness was cut short by repeated mad animals attacking the base. Unfortunately, they had not finished the wall before these attacks began, and so once again had to hunker down inside and wait for them to pass. After researching septic tanks, the team knew they needed to focus on more complex research, and so decided to buckle down and try to figure out how to make a lathe, something that would allow them to make complex components, something that they are in short supply of at this point. With the wall ever so close to being finished, they were once again cut short by those strange floating eels that had gone insane. However, while they were stuck inside, Kivi and Agent saw it fit to celebrate their marriage, finally, after all this time. It was a brief ceremony, but they didn't need anything lavish. They were just happy to finally celebrate their day, with everyone getting along. For once their food supplies were high, and life here was finally starting to take a turn. They hoped that this wasn't just a promise to each other, but also a promise to everyone, a commitment to the group, that they would find a way home together. But even if they couldn't, even if somehow they could never escape, at least there was a way for them to be happy, a way to continue on. And as the group been so desperate and focused to escape, it was comforting to know that they could survive and be happy here if all else failed. Once the group had finally figured out how to build a lathe, they decided to figure out how to make batteries so that they could store their power in case generators broke down or other issues arose. After what felt like an eternity, the wall was finally built. It wasn't the strongest thing in the world, it wouldn't hold up to many attacks, but at the very least it would stop the wild animals coming to their front door. With the wall finally secure, the team felt comfortable making farms outside of their greenhouses. They focused on making some tree farms so they would have a continual supply of wood to burn and also for building. Once they'd finished building these farms, a chunk of spacecraft landed near their base. They weren't sure if this was from the Hermes or something else, but they hoped whatever the case, it would have useful resources inside. However, the part of the crashed ship nearby lingered in everyone's minds. So much so that Aliona took it upon herself to see once and for all what was making those strange noises and emitting the strange gas. After firing some rounds into the ship, some strange individuals came out. They were strange mushroom people, the kind that had clearly infected Reginald's grandmother before she crash landed at the base. These individuals, however, were unknown and clearly hostile towards them. Aliona fired some shots at them, hoping to scare them, but instead it incentivized them to attack her directly. Aliona fled as quickly as she could. She managed to get back inside and lock the door before these strange monsters caught up to her. However, these fungoids did not let up and carried on attacking the walls, attempting to break them down. Aliona, naively, thought that she could take them out before they got into melee range, and instead got cut on her arm and hand by the fungoid. Although she managed to take out the individual, Her hand was clearly infected by some strange disease. Strange vein-like structures appeared all over her arm, slowly discoloring and changing before her eyes. Their quality of medicine was clearly not good enough to treat this kind of wound, and the infection just kept getting worse. Now that they knew that the fungoids carried this disease, they were cautious when attacking the second individual, and although it got close at one point, they managed to take it out without damage. The group decided that it wasn't worth the risk of leaving this disease, this growth, to develop on Aliona, and it was with great sadness that the group decided they would have to amputate her hand. Reginald, as the best medic, did the best he could, and with the limited medicine they had, managed to cut her hand off cleanly and get rid of the strange, diseased hand before it could spread any further. Aliona was a major part of this colony, a major part of its growth and development. To have her hand amputated was a massive loss for the colony. Reginald attempted to make a hook hand for her. It wouldn't be anywhere near as good as her original hand, but it was better than nothing, and they hoped with more research they might be able to replace it with something more high-tech in the future. With the fungoids now defeated, Kivy went out to finally destroy the ship, and finally claim the resources that it held. It wasn't worth the loss of Aliona's hand, but the resources were needed nonetheless. It wasn't long after this that another transport pod was seen crashing down near the base. The individual inside, Aliski Kepe, a 15-year-old who had been a colonist on the Hermes. Buck rescued him and patched him up, just glad that there were still other survivors out there. And after rescuing him, Kepe thanked them and said that if possible he would like to stay with the colony. The group obviously accepted, happy just to see another face. Kepe wasn't particularly talented. He was a coward and wasn't very good at combat. However, he was pretty quick on his feet and was also fairly intelligent. And being as young as he was, they hoped that he would become a useful member of the colony in time. With the loss of Aliona's hand, the group decided to research how to build sterile materials in the hopes that they could build a better hospital to provide better medical treatments going forward. With the bovine beetle pen to full capacity, they decided to expand it to allow their beetles more room to roam, as well as to have access to fresh pasture. This would also allow for more bovine beetles and more food supply, something they would need for their growing colony. A migration of strange alien creatures that passed by the base fascinated the group. These creatures were varied in size and colour, but all of them looked like jellyfish floating across the landscape. They reminded the group that despite the biome they were based in, just how far away they were from home. With winter quickly closing in, and Ash feeling the winter chill, the team decided to build some heaters around the base. They were past the point of struggling to survive. It was time they spent some of their hard-earned resources feeling comfortable within their own home. And after they'd researched sterile materials, they thought it was finally time to set up a renewable and worthwhile fuel source. With their septic tanks set up and waste being collected, biofuel refining seemed like the most useful addition to the colony. Refining their waste would provide them with a useful fuel source that could easily power their base going forward, long into the future, much more reliable than the wood that they'd been using up till now. It was at this point, however, another large ship chunk came crashing down from the sky, an almost exact replica of the one that contained the fungoids that took Aliona's hand. They could hear the individuals clawing at the walls from the inside. They now knew what they were up against, and decided to leave them be in there. Although the resources contained within were useful, none of them were prepared to fight them off just yet. With the septic tank finally fully built, the team could finally get rid of their sewage outlet, dumping their waste onto the ground, and now they could save it for future refining. With that, the team needed to expand the base, and so they created an add-on to the kitchen dining room, somewhere where they could house a biofuel refinery as well as a few generators. And it wasn't long before they built the first prototype biofuel refinery. Once they fixed it up and got it working, they started the process of refining their waste into usable chem fuel. And with a chem fuel generator built, they got to work refining their fecal sludge. The generator was a huge step up from their small wood burner generator they'd had previously. It outputted a huge amount of power, and also a large amount of heat, melting all the snow in the nearby vicinity. With that, they could say goodbye to their old generator and battery, and store it in case they needed to travel again in the future. With their research into biofuel refining finally finished, they decided to focus their efforts on food supply once again. The huge amounts of insects they had been butchering had gone to waste, mostly due to the fact that the meat was so disgusting to eat. they decided to try an experiment making stews. They hoped cooking the meat in this way might disguise the flavour and texture of it, which would make it more palatable, and would increase the amount of food coming in once again. However, just when they were starting to get concerned about their food supply, a cluster of cargo pods from the Hermes crashed nearby. These contained something that none of them expected: soybeans. It might not seem like much, but this was the first new Earth-like food source they'd seen since arriving on this planet. Agent quickly ran to pick them all up and to process them into seeds so they could plant some soybeans and have a steady supply going forward. However, Buck had other ideas. Because of some recent food poisoning, she'd been in pain all day, and because of this decided to throw a tantrum, blindly destroy the biofuel refinery they'd all worked hard on for so long. Kivy took the hard decision to arrest Buck before she could destroy the thing they'd worked so hard on. Arresting someone in the colony was unprecedented, but as she had come so close to destroying all of their hard work, she left them no choice. They only left Buck imprisoned overnight, and as soon as she'd come to her senses and apologised, they let her out. Most of them were in bad moods as well. The base was especially disgusting recently. Between all the major building works going on and the food poisoning, the base was filthy, and was putting all of them in bad moods. Kivy decided therefore to try and clean the base as quickly as possible, to prevent any more mental breaks. The colony had come along massively over the past few months. There were now 7 of them, with a huge amount of bovine beetles. Their base had almost doubled in size, and they'd progressed faster with research than ever before. With the wall in place, they all felt safer, and they all felt positive about the future. However, there was further news. Kivy was once again pregnant. Despite giving birth to Ash only a few weeks prior, she was pregnant once again. A new baby would bring hope to the group, but there was also another mouth to feed, another person to clothe and house, and with their ever-expanding colony, they all worried about how they were going to cope going forward. So, thank you so much for watching, everyone. If you'd like with Sim, please leave a like and subscribe. A massive thank you to all my Patreon and YouTube members: Clint, David, Len, Valise, Lord Me Lord, T Chaos, Toolman, Nacho Cheese, Mikey Soundtrack, King of Thorns, Skylar Birchwell, Charles, Mint Salad, Lats, Brian, Heretic, Fabio, and Codry Pierce. Thank you so much, everyone. You guys are amazing. Thank you so much for all your support. It means a lot, so I can't thank you guys enough. So cheers, and I will see you in the next episode. Bye-bye.